welcome to part 4, the final part, plus the odd extra video of me actually using this. Since the last video, this has appeared, but before I can explain that, let's go make some sparks and do a bit of engineering. Be back shortly. I had a bit of a learning moment in the previous video. You'll have seen me cutting the alloy axle of the drum, and I started off using a grinding wheel, a cutting wheel, and finished off using a hacksaw, and there was a reason for that. In the way I'd got the blade mounted on the angle grinder. When you're using a thick grinding disc, there's a flange on the arbor here, and there's a flange on this nut, and that flange needs to go down so that it sits in the grinding wheel and holds it steady. However, I wasn't using a grinding wheel, I was using a thin cutting disc like this one, and here the cutting disc is the width of that flange on the arbor, and so you have to have this nut downwards with the flange up so that the whole of the nut is gripping the disc. I didn't do that. I had that flange downwards as for the cutting wheel, which means that the disc isn't being held tightly. Once you tighten it up, it seems to hold it tightly, but actually that flange is only pressing on the very edge of this metal insert, and it won't hold it tight enough. And what happened yesterday with this disc is that came off, and the disc suddenly started vibrating and flapping around. I don't think I was in any danger because it was still held firmly on the wheel. Well, it wasn't held firmly because it was moving around, but you can imagine having something vibrating that's doing that is it was a little moment. It had me worried, and I didn't quite understand why this had failed. I assumed it was because it was an old disc, but no, it was because I had this the wrong way round. So, thin discs, flange upwards. snug. Lovely. Here's my adjustment mechanism. I purchased this from my local second-hand tool store. I don't know what it was off, but it's the adjuster off something. It has a left-handed thread, so as you turn this clockwise, or clockwise from this perspective, it's driving this off in that direction. Now, originally this would have been resting in some piece of equipment and adjusting who knows what. I don't know where it came from, but for my application, because this is going to be bolted to the side of the sander, I needed to add this arm which will get attached to the top of the sander, and I've had to make it articulated. I've put a hinge here with a 10mm stainless steel pin straight the way through, because that's going to be joined firmly to the top and the angles will change as the top raises. Now, I haven't got much play in this. There is a little bit of play, but that should be alright once the weight of the top is pushing down. It should provide quite an accurate adjustment. But this is going to be in the middle of the table, and to avoid any flexing and my usual over-engineered belt and braces approach, I've got these two struts to attach either side of the table, and they're just simple hinge at each end. This will attach again to the side, and this will attach to the top, and a simple thumb wheel, and it will just give me the ability to lock off the height once it's adjusted to what I want, just to provide that extra bit of stability, solidity, and there won't be any play in that at all. It was a little bit of an engineering challenge for me, considering I haven't got a welder. I could have done with a welder here, as I'm sure some people will have probably noticed. I had to create this like this because there is only one peg on this side. There's no peg over here, so I had to attach these two halves firmly together. Should have welded them really, but don't have a welder. It took a while to square off the hole for this. This is a carriage bolt, so I don't have to worry about this bolt turning and get that nice and tight. But all good fun, even though it took me a fair while to do. So just got to get those attached to the top, and then I won't need to screw anything else into the top, so the top should be stable and ready to receive the steel laminate. There's no glue, just screws at the moment. Whether I'll glue it in future, I don't know. But that's the basic idea. And then we have our table height adjustment, and yes, up goes the table. Very slowly. I'm absolutely sure that this works. By the way, it seems very solid. I'm happy with that. But I just want to make sure that the mechanism works properly before I screw it in place. I've got it so that it's pretty much upright when it's at its maximum, which is mostly where I'll be using it for thin pieces. And as the table lowers, it will swing out slightly, which is what it's doing now, which is potentially where it could get a little bit unstable, but we'll see. Trouble with a very fine height adjustment, it takes forever to wind at its full extent. And of course, a millimetre in height here is only half a millimetre in height where the drum is. Actually, I might push it in that way a little bit. I can see a problem. I had intended the arm to go that way, not this way. So I might have to chisel it a little bit out at the top here. No, that's fine. Good. And up we go again. This is really awkward. I'm going to have to take this all the way up so that comes off. Swing that forward so I get access to the screw here. And I'm hoping that in all of this it's not going to move. Actually, I can now get the drill in there. Or can I? Oh, wow. Wow. want to motorise this. So when I have it at height, I just lock off the two side ones, and then it's absolutely rock solid. Oh yes, I like that. Whew, good job. Before I do anything else, I've still got a gap, a bigger gap here than here. That's very close fitting there. So I think that's about 1 millimetre. But it doesn't really matter because the main difference is I've got the feeler gauges set to 0.9 of a millimetre, and with those feeler gauges I've got the same thing down here. So there's a 0.9 of a millimetre difference between the two ends. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shim the hinge over here and just lift it slightly. I think by 0.9 of a millimetre, because the whole table, yeah. So that's the next thing to do. As I suspected, that hasn't completely reduced the deficit. There's still maybe 0.3 of a millimetre difference between the two ends, because of the geometry, the fact that that gap's sort of halved. Oops, no. As you can see, it's pretty close. I may shim this end very slightly, but I wanted to avoid shimming this too much because I didn't want the this to be out of horizontal. The question is, has that gone in straight? Yes! As I'm basing the dust extractor hood on an octagon in cross section, I need an external angle of 135 degrees, so I'm going to set the angle of the blade on the table saw to 67.5. It'll all make sense, hopefully. That's 135 degrees. Here's a neat trick. If you line this up on the edge of the bench, then you can sight down the blade in order to get the cut absolutely vertical. So what that leaves me with is I've got my Phillips, well whatever, the supports for the joints, and I've got a nice close fitting inner edge but a very neat outer edge, which is a simple octagon. Just scoring the surface with 80 grit just to give the bond just key. No, it doesn't actually say that in the instructions. I figure this is probably the best thing to do. This is the adhesive I'm going to use. Now, I've used this before, and usually you apply it to both surfaces, let them go dry, and then bring the surfaces together and you get an instant bond. It just sticks rock solid. And that makes me very nervous because it means I've got to get the top in exactly the right position first time. However, reading the instructions, it says there's a quick option of when you've got just one, or when they say at least one porous surface, you can apply the adhesive just to the least porous side and then just bring the surfaces together and smooth them down and then leave for 24 hours. And I can do that. And that makes me far less nervous about getting the plate in the wrong position. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use their quick option. It says apply a thin coat to one surface. Assuming they mean the thickness of the spreader that they provide. This is going to go all over the place. I think this goes off quite quickly, so I really need to get this on fast. Ah, it's dripped already. I don't know what the chances of air bubbles are under this. I really just plonked it straight down on top without much thought to that. Seems pretty flat. Do not disturb or test the bond for 24 hours to allow the adhesive to achieve full strength. So despite what I said at the start of this video, this isn't the last video. I'm going to have to leave it there because I've also got this bond on top that needs to set properly because I need to plane the edges. The edges are sticking slightly proud and I need to put the top on, have it all nice and flush. So there's a little bit to do, but it's mostly now just putting it all back together and getting it properly adjusted, adjusting the height of the shims on each side to achieve a perfectly parallel sand, and truing the drum, putting a little bit of varnish on the drum to seal it, make sure it's stable, and we're nearly there. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye.